By now, in the year 2025, mockumentaries have an established niche in film, and have for decades. Movies like This Is Spinal Tap, What We Do in the Shadows, District 9, and TV shows like The Office or Parks and Rec have brought this style to a wider audience.
Great success.
While some other early filmmakers could be considered to be the first mockumentarians, British filmmaker Peter Watkins was the first to lean into it, gaining both Academy credibility and notoriety through his second feature film, The War Game. He had a high view of visual mediums like film and television as a means to promote change, and most of his highest profile films are searing strikes on nation-level wrongs that he saw. His political work evokes heavy emotion due to the weighty subject matter. Great wrongs demand strong responses, and his work is up to the task. Peter Watkins passed away on October 30th, 2025 at the age of 90, but the power of his work can live on as long as people will remember it, and I'm here doing what I can to pass it along. I will briefly cover 3 of his films, namely Culloden, The War Game, and Punishment Park, because they're all wonderful examples of mockumentaries/docudramas. Also, I have them on disc, so easier to get clips. Chronologically, the first is Culloden. Technically, this is more docudrama than mockumentary, but it's a fine line. This is a film covering the Battle of Culloden in 1745, which the film describes as an account of one of the most mishandled and brutal battles ever fought in Britain. It's the most stylistically distinctive of the 3. The presentation is of a modern-day camera crew being present for the battle, interviewing troops face-to-face, narrating the battle as they, the crew, navigate it. There's no effort to acclimate the soldiers on either side to the technology. They simply take it in stride, as they should, I think. It simply wouldn't help the film at all to have a section of it dedicated to not knowing what cameras are. There's something about hearing from people directly that you don't get from documentaries about which there's no footage, right? 1745, cameras wouldn't be around for another 100-something years. But I love the choice here because we can see the faces of people representing people of that era. We can hear the voices, the accents, we can hear their interests directly, we can see body language, their facial tics, all these things that help us connect more strongly and makes this history feel a little bit more personal. And I truly think the effect is powerful. By the end of the film, I was crying under the end credits due to the film's powerful conclusion. I described his political work as showing great wrongs which demand strong responses, and this is full of those. And the wrongs aren't even limited to just the Brits, but the Scots as well. Watkins has a clear vision for highlighting the plight of the common man, especially the common oppressed man, the average Scottish foot soldier. Scottish landowners commit great wrongs by essentially forcing their serfs into military service on their behalf, pointing to a twisted social hierarchy, a form of caste system. Scottish officers are incompetent, tragically misusing the forces assigned to them. But of course, the Brits have plenty of faults as well. The Brits have serious economic issues, and the soldiers are woefully underpaid compared to the officers. But the British soldiers have soldiers to look down on, the Scots, and someone to take their issues out on. The Brits do unspeakable things to pacify the Scots as well. So we get these tragedies across the board, both sides suffering from tragedies, but the bearer of all of them combined are the regular everyday Scots, the poor Scots who are at the bottom of the caste system. It was meant, to some degree at least, for Watkins to draw attention to the Vietnam War, and he was frustrated by the lack of public connection of the 2 events to critiquing modern Britain as well, as this is an issue that he viewed had never stopped. And there is also, I think, a beautifully bitter sense of humor to the film. The narrator delivers deadpan lines that are almost always sad or cutting, still elicit a chuckle just out of despair almost in a sense, just as an emotional reaction. Culloden is a great film and a brilliant start to Watkins' career, which hadn't even begun to peak yet. Next was The War Game. This is a mockumentary covering a vision of the worst-case scenario accompanying nuclear war for Britain. Here the delivery is much more straightforward than Culloden. It's told in the style of a news magazine program, which is to say duly narrated current events. Depictions of post-nuclear society are interspersed with narration from societal and governmental leaders, which are not factual, but according to Watkins were based upon statements made by similar real-life figures. The depictions progress and society degrades, with the film continuing to elaborate on the hypothetical effects of a nuclear war. The War Game was funded by the BBC, but wound up being banned from broadcast upon completion because, quote, the effects of the film had been judged by the BBC to be too horrifying for the medium of broadcasting. It was still shown in a limited theatrical run, and at international film festivals. It would go on, oddly enough, to win an Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature feature, despite being entirely hypothetical. In a sense, the BBC's reaction was understandable. This is not an easy film to sit through, and I can only imagine doubly so in the 60s. It does not go easy on the implications of nuclear war for the people, and it doesn't go easy on either physical or practical implications. There are some pretty brutal makeup effects in the film, but it also shows the toll that it would take on real life. Society breaks down, law-abiding members of society cannot afford to abide by the law enforcement grows even more brutal to suppress the breakdown of society. But once again, similar to Culloden, there is a small streak of pitch black, bitter humor in the film, usually related to contrasts between messaging and reality. The war game put Watkins on the map internationally, but in my mind, his crowning achievement is Punishment Park. Punishment Park was inspired in part by the McCarran Act, also known as the Internal Security Act. The act was made with the goal of targeting alleged communist organizations. The part concerning Watkins was the Emergency Detention Statute, which gave the president the authority to apprehend and detain each person as to whom there is a reasonable ground to believe that such person will probably engage in acts of espionage or sabotage. Watkins took the war game to an extreme. He here also takes that provision to an extreme end, to superb effect. While this didn't leave me crying like Culloden, it does still have such a clear emotion to it. It's got some of the angriest editing you'll ever see in a movie. It starts seconds into the film with the lawmaking voiceover cutting into the American flag, and it just continues throughout. Its emotions are written all over its sleeves. While the emotion is clear and potent, this doesn't feel like a pointless yelling. The argument is measured and progresses well, even if it feels like Watkins is on the verge of blowing up. It was his habit to cast non-professional actors in his films, and that continued here. So perhaps another bit of the passion shining through the film is from the actual passion, from real actors, giving their sometimes real opinions, sometimes role-played opinions, real people coming to real conclusions, being highlighted in fictional roles. And it is interesting to hear him talk about actors in that same interview I referenced earlier. Some of the non-professional actors are giving their own thoughts, some are role-playing. He says the amazing thing is that you can't tell which is which, and I agree. I think on learning that tidbit, no one immediately jumped to mind to me as someone just pretending to have that conviction they had. He wanted to allow everyone the freedom to come up with their own arguments and points because he wanted a more free-form and less rigid interaction between the sides. Now, of course, it's worth noting that, ultimately the filmmakers still have control through editing over how that argument looks, right? So, of course, Watkins, being left-leaning, has something on his mind and is going to produce something that is going to lean that way, that is in support of the issues that he is perceiving. So, of course, in the end product, at least it's clear to me, the protesters have a much stronger argument. But the most important thing to me, I think, is that this is another way of wiping away the barrier between documentary and fiction. It's a fictional film that's using real elements, real people with real opinions, to tell a fictional story based on real laws and practices. And I think it's fascinating and a wonderful effect. Combine the argumentation with the technical elements and the brutally raw emotion, and I think this is the greatest mockumentary I've ever seen, and certainly among the finest films I've ever seen. I'll add in one last note on Watkins, and that is his concern about mass media, especially TV/film, documentaries, the role of festivals and theaters. He refers to the concept of the monoform in some of his talks, in which he describes essentially media created to propel an audience member to a specific conclusion, with the elements along the way meant to sort of speed the audience into that funnel, to that one end. He has a short talk on the Black Maria Film Collective on the topic, discussing his thoughts on the responsibility of filmmakers to attempt to engage in a genuine discourse and have films which stretch the medium and speak through them. It's a loss not just for filmmakers to have a generally less flexible style to achieve success. And it's also a loss for the public to not be exposed to as many interesting ideas and interesting forms, to have the perception of cinema and mass media as a way to grow and learn instead of something primarily for entertainment. There's a place for entertainment in film without a doubt, but it is also a powerful tool. People somewhere are always pushing the form in the corners of cinema, and I think Watkins raises an excellent point that these pushes are to be fought for and championed when they can, that we should fight for cinema to be viewed as a tool for change and a tool for thought and a tool for progress. Peter Watkins cared about the world that he lived in, and he cared about what he excelled in, and he cared about the people he could reach. And I think that's a legacy that any person would be honored to achieve.